doing nothing is a choice, and it's a very poor choice. So I think we need to be brave and think about how do we ensure that the BBC remains financially sustainable going forward.
The BBC has its problems. Income from the licence fee is falling. Young viewers are abandoning its channels. The costs of making television has rocketed, and there's been scandal after scandal about Star's behaviour. The Sunday Times reports that Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy wants to abolish the licence fee. Is that a good idea? Let's talk to the former Conservative Culture Secretary, Lucy Frazer. Lucy, good morning to you.
Good morning.
You'll have looked at this. It was created a long time ago, the idea of licences for radio and then for television. You wouldn't invent the licence fee now if you had to come up with a way of funding the BBC, I don't think. Is that a good enough reason to get rid of it?
The reason that we need to look at it is for the reasons that you've outlined. So the licence fee is now an unsustainable form of funding for the BBC because people aren't watching the BBC in the way they used to because they've got so many other choices, and young people aren't watching the BBC in the way that the older generations are. And last year alone, the BBC lost 500,000 licence fee payers. And as a result of that, its income falls, and its income fell by 30% between 2010 and 2020. So it's not sustainable to continue on this path, because if we continue on this path, the BBC is going to get less and less funding, and it's not going to provide the service that it provides at the moment. So we need to look at this.
And there's also the fairness point, isn't there, about how it's prosecuted. People who don't have a licence fees, it tends to be women who get prosecuted. They can be taken to magistrates' courts for it. It feels odd that the state can prosecute someone for not paying for a licence for a television when they can watch things on their computer. Everything about that feels like it was created as it was 50, 70, 100 years ago.
It's wholly disproportionate to prosecute people and imprison people for failing to pay the licence fee. We've got an issue at the moment with a number of people in our prisons, and this feels wholly draconian and an unnecessary remedy for failure to pay what is effectively a fee to watch television. So it's really difficult to work out what the answer to this is. But I looked at it very closely when I was Secretary of State, and I don't think there's one answer. There are several answers. And the BBC is many things to different people. We need to support it. It needs to be maintained. But it needs to have a hybrid model of funding. So you need to have something like the licence fee for core services, for example, news, but other things as well. But in terms of the sorts of productions it makes for TV that are mainstream entertainment, there's no reason why that should be paid by the licence fee, and shouldn't, for example, be a subscription. At the moment, we pay Netflix and Disney in order to get our entertainment. So that seems a very reasonable model for additional services.
So maybe instead of a licence, is there sort of a taxation thing to cover some of it? So you effectively, if you are a British citizen, if you're a member of this country, you, at some stage along the way, you pay something towards the national broadcaster. That might not be as much as it is now. That might cover core services in a different way. But is that the way of doing it? It becomes a tax rather than a licence you have to acquire, and then Capita have to come and knock your door down and check whether you've got it or not. Is that the more efficient way of doing it?
It might be more efficient, but it's potentially politically toxic. We've already had an increase in our tax bills that hasn't gone down very well in the economy. We're slowing on growth, and I don't think it's reasonable for the Labour government to increase to bring in another tax. And then when you say to people, we're going to increase your taxes, and do you know what? That tax is going to go on Strictly Come Dancing, not on your schools and hospitals. I think that would be very politically unwise, unfair, and not the right thing to do.
I'm sure that's
so
right, Lucy, but ultimately a licence is a tax. If you have to buy a licence of some form and you get prosecuted if you don't, that is a tax by any other name. I just wondered if there's a way of doing it which doesn't require enforcement measures.
Well, it will be possible to be able to see who isn't paying the licence fee as digital services change in the future. I do think we should change the prosecution system, but that doesn't mean that we should bring in a tax. And I don't think, I'm not in favour generally of high taxes, but also I just don't think it's a politically viable thing for the government to do, to increase taxes at the moment. So that's why I would keep the license fee for the moment because it works, because everyone's comfortable with it. There are some issues with it, and you could look about how much it is and how people pay and are there different levels. But I think essentially it's a system that works for the moment for a core service.
So what do you get? What is the core service? That's what it boils down to. Is the core service then the news, the radio? Is it the website? How do we define what is a core service and what is something that you could say, well, that's something you have to, if you want to watch David Attenborough or if you want to watch Strictly Come Dancing, that's part of BBC Plus, and BBC Plus has commercially type programs that could sustain a commercial audience, and you have to pay extra for that. Is that how do you divide that?
Well, you need to have a conversation about that. You need to consult on that. You need to take views. I don't think it would be straightforward, but for my part, it would definitely include news. You might want to think about it including children, programming for children, because not many other people find that commercially attractive. But I think we would need to have a consultation and wide discussion on that so that people felt that they had their views heard. Because I think it is a difficult question, but that's not a reason not to do it.
No, although it feels like it's so difficult a conversation with everything else that's going on, this will never happen. I mean, maybe it'd be easier for Labour to do it than Tories, actually, because if you did it, it would be the wretched Tories trying to kick down one of our institutions. If Labour do it, then they might be given a bit more of a hearing. But I just can't quite work out a time at which things will be going well enough where people say, we're going to split the BBC funding into these two things. Strictly goes here, the news goes here, and we'll have an argument at all the middle ones. I don't know if we're going to be ever sailing in such unchoppy waters, Lucy, that will enable us to do that.
We won't. But the irony is that if we do nothing, we're going to destroy the BBC. Because if we do nothing and we just find this too difficult a decision and we're embarrassed to discuss the future of the BBC because it's difficult and will annoy some people, the reality is that the BBC is going to get less and less funding as the years go on. And it's not going to be able to survive in this new market that we have. So doing nothing is a choice, and it's a very poor choice. So I think we need to be brave and think about how do we ensure that the BBC remains financially sustainable going forward.
Really interesting. Well, we'll see when it gets discussed and what happens. Lucy, good to speak to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much.
That's Lucy Frazer, the former Conservative Culture Secretary.